and the omnibus. So I was forced into the Archers when I was a child. And look, it's come back to bite me later on.
I'm awash with this stuff.
The Archers is the world's longest-running radio show, with more than 15,000 episodes broadcast. Despite being a rural flavour show, The Archers is recorded in the heart of the UK's second-largest city, Birmingham.
Hello and welcome to the programme. This week, the cuts are getting deeper.
The latest local radio cuts are indicative of how out of touch the BBC is with their audience.
The BBC's plans to slash local radio output has provoked a furious response from listeners and politicians alike.
Does the Minister agree that local radio cannot call itself local when it stops being local after 2 p.m?
Yeah.
I'll be talking to the acting director of BBC England and asking whether the corporation risks alienating its existing audience in pursuit of an imaginary new one. Also,
the faked, marrow, horsey, guess the weight of the pumpkin stuff ruins my time out. It's boring.
Please let the Archers retain its USP of a gentler life.
the story of Chelsea Horrobin's pregnancy has divided Archer's listeners. The programme's editor, Jeremy Howe, is here to explain why he thinks there's always a place for younger, grittier plotlines alongside the more sedate tales of rural life. And
this whole system is at breaking point. We can't continue as we are.
Why did World at One think Nigel Farage was the right person to discuss overcrowding in Manston Immigration Centre? It certainly wasn't a popular choice with feedback listeners.
I am at a loss to understand why it is acceptable for the BBC to feature Nigel Farage on this serious issue when it would be more appropriate to interview a member of the official opposition.
But first, it's been described as the biggest threat facing BBC local radio since its birth in 1967. The BBC has announced that it's going to cut local radio output content across all 39 local stations in England. This will mean shows will only be local from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. The rest of the airtime will be replaced by regional programmes. In its press release, the BBC trumpeted the plan as
transforming its local services to deliver greater value to communities across England.
But a great many others greeted the news with considerably less enthusiasm. And on Tuesday, Labour MP Emma Hardy tabled an urgent question in the Commons.
Does the Minister agree that local listeners should have been consulted? Does the Minister also agree that the loss of provision will be damaging to communities as they lose an important voice for their experiences and concern with local services, democracy and accountability?
In her response, the Media Minister, Julia Lopez, seemed to share some of Emma Hardy's concerns.
She talked about the need for consultation, and I would have hoped that I would have had a greater chance to examine these proposals before they were released. This is something I shall be talking to the BBC next week about, and I'm grateful for her to raise these issues.
Hi, my name's Sean McAllister. I'm a documentary filmmaker, originally from the city of Hull.
And Janet in Killingham, we're grateful for your message. Says she loves local radio, wouldn't want to be without it. She can't come on because she feels so angry about it.
I was dismayed to hear that the BBC were making cuts to local radio. I think it must be one of the cheapest services the BBC provides, and it's just an invaluable service to communities. I don't know what they're saving, but surely they can slice money from some salaries and bigwigs that are on the TV rather than hitting community radio, which is such an invaluable service. It's a travesty.
The sound of where we live is BBC Radio Tees.
This is Ray from North Yorkshire. I think local radio offers a vital service to the local community, which cuts in funding will damage. I do listen to the national networks, but my local radio station does things they don't.
6 with your latest BBC News, I'm Cara Thorpe. Businesses in Leeds say major roadworks in the city are now seriously...
Graham Brown, Wakefield. The latest local radio cuts are indicative of how out of touch the BBC is with their audience. Their aim appears to be to put as much online as they can and attract a younger audience, whatever the effect on the older listeners.
And the Bank of England has had to spend £65 billion to prop up the markets because of what they describe as a material risk. Where have you been?
Well, I think we've got to remember the situation.
I'm Laura Phillips from London. I think cuts to the local content of BBC Local Radio are a huge mistake when trust in politicians is so low. Local radio journalists don't only ask people like Liz Truss, "Where have you been?" They hold to account MPs and councillors on their patches all over the UK. If you take the local out of BBC Local Radio, what have you got left?
So what's the thinking behind these changes and what do they mean for the future of BBC Local Radio? Well, Jason Horton is the acting director of BBC England and he joins me now from Salford. Jason, why are you doing this?
Andrea, hello. Fundamentally, we want to serve our local audiences much better in the years to come. We know the value of BBC Local Radio and our BBC Local television services as well. But ultimately, our local radio stations reach about 15% of the population of England every single week. And whilst we want to maintain the brilliant programming that we have across local radio, we've got to be true to all of our licence fee payers up and down the country. And we think there is a big win for our services in our digital platforms as well. And that means getting the best of our journalism, the best of our sports coverage, the best of our local radio and our video onto and accessible via our BBC apps of news, sport, iPlayer and sounds as well.
So what you're saying is that you'd like to maintain local radio, but what you're actually doing is cutting local radio. Let's be honest.
Look, we are not cutting in any way the spend that we have across BBC England.
So in no way is this cost saving. Is there any cost saving here at all?
Fundamentally, no cost saving at all. We are dealing with inflationary pressures in exactly the same way as every other business is. But the budget that I have to run BBC local services across radio, television and online remains exactly the same now as it will at the end of the implementation of this strategy.
So you're moving the money that you have from local radio into online?
Some of the money that we have.
Right. And the problem that we have is that a lot of our listeners are saying that that's not what they want. Did you ask them?
We're talking to our local radio listeners right now. And remember, these are proposals.
Shouldn't you talk to them before you did this?
These are proposals that we first put forward in May. We've added the detail this week, and we are talking to our listeners. You know, even as I speak to you, I've been looking at feedback that's coming in from our listeners.
So we've had lots of feedback, which we'd obviously be delighted to share with you.
Of course.
And the feedback that we're getting is saying that this is absolutely not what they want. These are people who do not want to access things online, maybe can't access things online. So local is really important to them. So are you saying that if local radio listeners tell you that this is not what they want, you'll change your mind?
We have 39 local radio stations up and down the country right now. At the end of this process, we will have 39 local radio stations up and down the country. We will be live and local.
But a lot of what they listen to will be regional and not local. That's the difference, isn't it?
We will be live and local between 6 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon when 70% of our audience across local radio is listening. Okay? We will provide local radio programmes, albeit shared, across the rest of the afternoon so that we are absolutely local.
But that's, if it's shared, it isn't local, is it? That's the point. If it's shared, it's regional. Can I just put to you a couple of the comments from our listeners? For example, the Reverend Eva McIntyre.
I am one of the more than 5 million listeners to local radio who pays for a BBC licence. I was appalled, upset and angered by the announcement of cuts to the service that will leave the service a shadow of itself. My anger was exacerbated that this decision has been made without consultation and in favour of more online services on an already oversaturated internet. Those of us who are loyal, licence fee paying BBC listeners are being sacrificed for an imaginary future audience that is not guaranteed to listen or fund the corporation.
The feeling amongst a lot of listeners is that you are chasing a young audience who you don't know that you're actually going to find online, and you're sacrificing people who are already there, who are telling you that they want to listen to local radio in the afternoon, at tea time and in the evening.
We are not sacrificing any of our local radio listeners at all. Every single Ofcom report that I've read or audience report that I read suggests that actually, I think we're patronising older listeners actually to think that they are not accessing our services via digital apps or the website. 55% of over 65-year-olds now have a connected device. They are absolutely able to get services via those apps, but our local radio services will fundamentally still be there. We will be providing that community information, those faith programs on a Sunday morning, the local sport week in, week out, every single week for all audiences.
Well, Graham from Wakefield has said, what is needed is a full radio audience research project, not just online, to find out what the audience wants. Then please publish the results. So I'm asking on behalf of Graham from Wakefield, would you do that?
Right. Look, the bottom line is that we're talking to our audience every single day. I don't think we have to have any separate projects or analysis. We are very clear on what our audience want, both from the feedback that they give us and from the audience surveys that we are doing all of the time. We'll be completely transparent with our audiences about all of the decisions that we are making, and we are talking to them day in, day out at the moment. Their views shape our output. They always have done since the day that BBC Radio Leicester went on air as our first local radio station. We have absolutely always listened to our audiences and will continue to do so.
But Jason, it seems to me that the audience is saying one thing and you're saying another. The audience is saying we do not want our local radio to be messed with. We do not want these cuts. And you're saying, no, trust me, this is what's best for an online future. Is this set in stone now?
We're consulting with our staff. So we will take on board feedback from them and we will take on board feedback from our audiences. But what is absolutely set in stone is my commitment to serve audiences across local radio, regional television, our local television services, and our local websites in the best way that I possibly can over the next few years.
Thanks to Jason Horton. Now, the issue of immigration dominated the headlines early this week following the petrol bomb attack at a migrant centre in Dover and subsequent revelations about overcrowding in the immigration facility in Manston. It's a problem clearly worth debating, but many people, both on social media and in the feedback inbox, were left fuming by the World at One's choice of guest on Monday's programme.
Well, Nigel Farage was leader of the UKIP, has long campaigned on immigration. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you on the programme. What do you think needs to happen now?
My name's Tony and I live in southwest Scotland. Nigel Farage being invited onto the BBC to discuss the migrant issue seems to be wrong on every single level. The BBC is simply wrong to invite him onto that level of media for any purpose and any reason whatsoever.
This whole system is at breaking point. We can't continue as we are, and unless we stop.
My name's Morgan Crumlish and I'm from Edinburgh. I was shocked that BBC World at One chose to have Nigel Farage on the programme on Monday the 31st of October. It would in future be more appropriate to have an expert on the situation or a government minister to discuss immigration issues rather than someone who's built a career around anti-immigrant sound bites.
Dave Perkins from Sheffield. I am at a loss to understand why it is acceptable for the BBC to feature Nigel Farage on this serious issue when it would be more appropriate to interview a member of the official opposition. Your presenter did not attempt to challenge any of his highly controversial views.
Nigel Farage, thank you very much.
Well, we wanted to put some of those points to someone at BBC News and also talk about balance and impartiality in reporting divisive issues like immigration. But no one was available, though we did get this statement.
We explored a range of views on this issue to reflect the different opinions surrounding the debate. The BBC's editorial guidelines set out that we should reflect a breadth and diversity of opinion. We also interviewed a specialist in international refugee law and a former Home Office Permanent Secretary.
And please do let us know what you think about that and anything else you hear on BBC Radio or Sounds. You can send an email to feedback@bbc.co.uk. And you can comment on Twitter, use the hashtag BBCR4Feedback. You can leave a phone message on 03 333 444 544. Or if you prefer, you can send us a WhatsApp message to the same number and leave a voice note. All those details and our postal address are on our website. And one programme which prompted a lot of reaction from listeners this week was Radio 3's Soundscape of a Century, an 8-hour marathon of classical music mixed with audio from the BBC archive. And in our inbox, at least, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive.
Hello, my name's Tim Riley and I live in Beckenham. I wanted to say how much I enjoyed the Soundscape of a Century. I ended up listening to it all day.
This is 2LO, the London station of the British Broadcasting Company calling. 2LO calling.
This is Helen Marston from Broadstairs. Many thanks to Radio 3 for its wonderful Soundscape of a Century.
This is your victory. Victory.
The choice of music and excerpts from the archives worked brilliantly together, each enriching the other, and showing the extraordinary breadth and wealth of events and experiences that the BBC Century has brought to us, the listeners.
This is Sally Minogue. I love the juxtaposition of Paul McCartney's mention of Stockhausen and Berio with their music, and then A Day in the Life by McCartney and Lennon.
I was always frightened of classical music, and I never wanted to listen to it because it was Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and sort of big words like that, and Schoenberg. You're in pop.
Christopher Johnson, South West London. Thank you so much for Soundscape of a Century. It was a moving, powerful necklace of words, music and bittersweet memories.
It's been confirmed that a new virus that has killed 3 people and has been spreading across China can be passed from person to person, not just from animals.
For hour after hour, I found myself unable to drag myself away from this broadcast.
The way ahead is hard.
And it balanced the highs and the lows, and I've rarely been so gripped by a radio broadcast or so moved.
Well, you can catch up with Soundscape of a Century on BBC Sounds. Now, a spoiler alert, because if, like me, you only listen to Sunday's omnibus edition of The Archers, you may want to avert your ears for a bit, because we're about to start discussing the soap's big storyline of the moment, teenager Chelsea Horrobin's pregnancy. It's been front and centre for weeks, the infamous Ambridge rave and the one-night stand with Ben Archer, followed by a lot, and I mean a lot of soul-searching about whether she was going to keep the baby. The plotline and its treatment has impressed many listeners. Others yearn for more tranquil and less gritty stories. Here's a selection of your thoughts.
I'm Malcolm Tattersall from Ampthill, Bedfordshire, and I've been listening to The Archers nigh on 50 years. But recent episodes sound like they've been written by fifth formers at Felpsham Comprehensive as part of their English GCSE project, an exam they're obviously doomed to fail. One gets a distinct impression that whoever writes this drivel is desperately trying to woo a new generation of trendy young Archers listeners. I fear they won't. Instead, long-standing fans like me will slowly switch off.
They said the procedure's going to be a bit more involved now that the pregnancy's further along. They're going to have to induce.
Oh. I'm Liz Barrett and I'm from Nottingham. I'm currently a full-time carer for 2 small children, and the only time I get to myself each day is when I escape to have a shower and listen to The Archers for 15 minutes. My day is considerably more enjoyable when the storylines focus on the younger and more dramatic characters. The faked, marrow, horsey, guess the weight of the pumpkin stuff ruins my time out. It's boring.
Meenakshi Sharma, Gloucestershire. I listen to The Archers for pure escapism, into a way of life that is totally out of my experience. I learn a lot about issues facing farmers from storylines like rewilding and the current story about the quality of soil. I know that grittier things do happen in rural areas, but for the grittier storylines, there are soaps on TV. Please let the Archers retain its USP of a gentler life.
All right. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah. Bye.
Was that Tracy?
What did she say?
It's done.
My name is Pam, and I live on the Polden Hills in Somerset. The wide range of issues the programme has been dealing with, from soil quality, slavery, alcoholism, and most recently abortion, have all been handled with sensitivity. The acting has been impressive. I have been moved, absorbed in the drama, which feels real.
And that nurse is right. There's a really promising future out there for you.
Well, divided opinions there on the Chelsea Horrobin saga. I've been speaking to the editor of The Archers, Jeremy Howe, and the actor who plays Chelsea, Maddie Leslay. I began by asking Jeremy why he decided to tackle the issue of abortion now.
The choices that we make in The Archers are, is this a good story? Will it fit the character? And you kind of want to develop a character. You need to put a character in a difficult and challenging situation and then explore it. And thirdly, you want to make sure it fits the Archers. And teenage pregnancy and abortion, they're both whacking great issues. But we're not really driven by issues. We're driven by, is this a good story?
I suppose with the constitutional right to abortion having been reversed recently in the US, the subject of abortion has become more topical recently. Did that figure in your thoughts and your plans at all?
Well, I mean, we were thinking about this story roughly this time last year. It wasn't the big issue that it became, and it was interesting that literally as we were storylining it, Roe versus Wade erupted in the States. Did it change our thinking? It certainly sharpened our thinking, and we made sure that we looked at the story from every which way. You know, should Chelsea have the baby? Should she be a single parent? Should she go with the father? Should she put the child up for adoption? Should she have an abortion? And I think the interesting thing about the story, I mean, what really drives it is we wanted to put a young woman in a very challenging situation and explore just how difficult the decision is.
Maddie, I'm sure that most listeners would agree that Chelsea has become a much more nuanced character because of this. We've learned, of course, an awful lot more about her. I wonder, when this storyline emerged, how much did you know, and from what stage were you involved in the process of the fact that Chelsea would be facing this range of options? Or did you know as soon as you were given the script that she was going to have a termination?
Usually with the storylines, we find out what's going on the week before when the scripts come through the door. With this one, I had a little bit of warning. Jeremy called to say that in the episodes leading up to her finding out that she was in fact pregnant, that Chelsea might be acting a little bit, as we would think, out of character, maybe getting a bit more angry or upset, being a bit more confused. The idea of her decision that she was going to make came along a little bit later, and it really felt in the performing of it. I did really feel her confusion and just how big the weight of how big this decision for her really was, and that there were different options, and her speaking to the other characters about their experiences of a similar nature.
This is Catherine ringing from Sevenoaks. I was interested to see how the story of Chelsea's unplanned pregnancy would pan out, since almost always these stories predictably end with the baby being kept and everyone eating Jill's flapjacks. I was proven wrong when a termination was chosen, which I think was a brave and realistic choice for the storyline, considering her age and their lack of a relationship.
I actually felt really proud of Chelsea. Having gone through the journey with her, I felt really proud of her that she made the decision, and she made the right decision for her.
Jeremy, you won't be surprised to know that not all of our listeners who got in touch with feedback and listened to The Archers did enjoy the storyline. People have accused it of being a Love Island-inspired Horrobin show. They've said, well, since when did the Archers become EastEnders? How do you take the criticism that there was something sensationalised about particularly how it was revealed to listeners who the father was? And indeed, it did drag out to the point that the character Chelsea was actually having a relatively late abortion.
I think it's important that we do play things out in real time, that you don't condense storytelling. And I mean, I think The Archers is sort of slow radio, and I think that's part of its appeal. I don't watch Love Island, so I'm not sure I could kind of answer the question that we've gone to Love Island. I mean, obviously, you want dramatic moments. And I think one of the gratifying things in the 10 days leading up to the revelation of who's the father, I kept on bumping into colleagues and neighbours, none of whom did I know listen to The Archers, asking who's the father. I mean, it was a gripping story. And of course, you want it to be dramatic. What I don't think we want to do with The Archers is be sensationalist. It was just a good dramatic way of telling the story.
Did you cross that line? Did you become sensationalist?
No, I think it was very dramatic.
You better press the buzzer. Get the nurse. Do you want me to press it?
I'm scared. Mum, I'm really scared.
Juliet Henham here from Axminster. I can't be the only listener to The Archers that is thoroughly sick of having storylines around children and teens. If I wanted storylines about a bunch of bickering idiots, I would watch Hollyoaks or some other dismal programme.
There are other listeners who've said that they're thoroughly sick of so many storylines involving children and teens at the moment. Was it a conscious decision to go down a route where not only do we have this major story about the character Chelsea, but we also seem to have been introduced to a lot of young people quite quickly?
The first baby that was born in The Archers was Tony Archer in 1951, and Tony Archer is now 70. I mean, you have to keep the succession, you have to keep the generations going.
But I think the criticism at the moment is that there is a focus on a lot of teen stories, and listeners are saying that actually that's disproportionate, and they feel that perhaps you're trying too hard to shoehorn a younger audience in. I mean, I wonder, do you have focus groups? Do you chase a particular demographic? How does that work?
The demographic we chase is the core Archer listener.
Perhaps the core Archer listener wants to listen to stories about people who are more likely their age.
I don't know that that's true. I think that people want to listen to stories about family life. And I mean, two of the biggest stories we've had over the last few years is Jim Lloyd's surprise 80th birthday party, where he kind of eventually reveals sexual abuse when he was a child.
So there are grittier storylines about older characters as well.
Oh, yeah.
Maddie, do your friends and family, and particularly friends of your own age, do they listen to The Archers?
Actually, yes. And even before I was in it, I have a group of friends who listened all throughout university. They've been listening to more of it than I have over the years. And my grandmother is a huge fan. So I have a lot of people close to me that it's been a big part of their lives for a long time. So it was, dream come true to be cast in it.
Thank you to Jeremy Howe and Maddie Leslay. And that's it for now. Until next week, from me, thank you for listening and giving us your feedback. Goodbye.
So, what are you doing now?
Just getting ready for the next episode. Just
And,
moving mics around.
So, what do you do?
I do the spot effects on the Archers. Any
Are you what we call Foley then?
Kind of. Yep.
Okay. And these are all part of the paraphernalia of production.
Yep. That's the ball bar. That's
this one.
Yep. That's.
I mean, Hayley so wanted to be in their own place when their baby came. It's due in 2 months. Not much chance of that now. No. I mean, it would have been a stretch for them financially, mind, but I just wish there was something practical I could do to help them, Caroline.
I think The Archers has had this immense popularity over the years, basically because it has always very accurately reflected the reality of life and living in a rural community, at whatever